Hi everyone, welcome to Season 2, Episode 1 of Some Drivel. As always, I'm your host JT, and it is honestly an absolute pleasure and a privilege to be joined by an actor, director, musician, voiceover artist of 35 plus years, and also, I will say this, genuinely an acting and performing hero of mine, Mr. Tim Russ. Tim, thank you so much for joining us on this. It is honestly a pleasure to have you.
My pleasure. Pleasure to be here.
So, I feel like just first of all, because of the strange, bizarre year that we've had, I know that for someone like yourself, the industry ground to a halt. So much of what was considered normal became, inaccessible and not possible because of logistics, because of the pandemic. So, just in terms of what that's been like for you personally, have you been able to keep working, or have you kind of largely just been in isolation?
Well, no, during the last year, I had at least three acting projects that were postponed. They were pushed until this year. As a matter of fact, I just finished up on the last of the three a couple of weeks ago here in LA because they were all postponed until 2021. and actually, the work that I did the most of last year during the pandemic was voiceover work.
Right.
Because voiceover, could either have been done and recorded at my own house under my system, or it could be done in a studio with just myself and the engineer.
Right.
And we're separated by, a booth, a soundproof booth. So there's no, if you walk in with a mask, the place is sprayed down, you go do your thing on the mic and you go home, and there's no contact with anyone else. And all the producers and directors are remote. They're doing all their directing and giving notes and things and hearing your performance remotely with what's essentially a Zoom type program that they use in the studios. So that makes it easier for us to be able to do that. That was the most work that I had done in terms of voiceover. I had at least 4 or 5 gigs during COVID that were all VO, because that was one of the few things we could actually do without having to worry about so much the COVID regulations and restrictions and all that good stuff. So
that's fantastic. I mean, I suppose so. The logical next question would then be, were you already set up for this? Did you have the equipment at home, or is this something you've had to adapt to over time?
No, I've had recording stuff at home for a while because the agency that I work for, I have a voiceover agency, and we have to do all of our audition pieces, the pieces they send us to read for, so that they can pitch us to the producers and things. If we have to record stuff, it's usually recorded at home. Pre-COVID, we could go into the studio at the agency and have them recorded there in the booth. But, logistically, it's just not practical to have to drive back and forth to that studio to do that. So most of the clients of the agency have their studios at home. And mine is not, one of the most expensive and most, complicated. Mine is actually pretty simple and basic. So it's a decent microphone, and it's a computer recording program, very simple. And I do all the recording of those pieces at the house, and then sometimes I do performance recordings as well. I did a podcast not long ago that I recorded at the house, and I had the director on a Zoom call with me so that they could hear what I was doing and give me notes or whatever. And we went through and recorded everything in the script just here in my office.
It's pretty impressive, the adaptability of the fact that, and the fact that this industry has been able to scale to a whole new set of circumstances that no one really could have predicted,
Yeah, I mean, because of the nature of that kind of work, given the fact that it's just basically you doing the work, and somebody just listening in, you can get that done, pandemic or not. And whereas the film stuff is, it's a big operation. It's just a full-on
absolutely
operation. A lot of logistics, a lot of people, a lot of hassle. So, the voiceover stuff can be done without expensive testing, without any of that stuff at all. And not having a bunch of people. It's just 2 people. If it's in a studio, literally is 2 people, and you're not in the same room. So you literally aren't even in the same space. And, if you make sure that the room is disinfected or cleaned or whatever, and the next person comes in, it's typically not an issue for doing that stuff. And it wasn't last year. I had no problems with it. And then you have the home setups that you can do at your house. Maybe one day I'll create an actual, booth space for me to work in. Right now, I don't have that. It would be better if I did. An actual, like a closet that you convert into a sound booth. And that's what most voiceover, a lot of voiceover actors and talent end up doing in order to be able to get even a better and cleaner sound. They also up the ante on their microphone. They'll get a more expensive microphone with a better quality diaphragm. So there's all those things that one can do to improve the quality. Because some of the bookings that you might make, they'll ask you if you can record at home.
Right, of course.
Because of course, whoever's paying you, it's cheaper for them to have you recorded at home than it is to
could you just find us a cupboard, please? That'd be great.
Yeah, right. And so they don't have to pay for a studio time per hour. And some of those big studios, some of the major studios, they require a minimum. They may only need you for an hour, but they'll require 4 hours, minimum time. So, it costs them more money to book you in a studio than it does, to do it at home. And also, that's for actually recording. And I don't have the software that they sometimes require. It's called Source Connect, which is software that allows you to the producers and stuff to listen in on your session, and it's a little bit more integrated than Skype or Zoom. Although Skype and Zoom seems to work pretty well for me. I don't know how it couldn't be any different. But sure. Source Connect goes through your recording program, so that they're actually listening to how the material is being recorded on your computer, rather than listening to it via a microphone from a screen on a Zoom screen.
So it's coming straight from the source.
Yeah, it's a different sound. They can hear exactly what you're recording and what the quality of that recording is. So
you've helped me beautifully with my segue here, Tim, because I wanted to ask you about that in terms of the feeling of voice acting, on paper. To me, the idea of comparing, say, voice acting to when you're on a set, I would have thought, maybe this is, an ignorant assumption, but that voice acting would feel restrictive. You're not able to use your full tool set. You're in a sort of, a very confined space with very specific parameters.
Yes.
However, from what you've just described, it sounds like it's worked out pretty well. It sounds like it's a pretty liberating thing, actually.
Yeah, I mean, depending upon what, based on what you're recording. I mean, it could be a commercial. It could be a character piece in a podcast, or an animated project, or a radio play. The difference is there's definitely a change and a switch between working on camera and working in voice. The camera has your face, and it picks up your expression, and a lot of stuff is done through expression, not necessarily through dialogue. Dialogue's just there to carry the story. But on film, it's about the action, it's about the expression in your face. So the camera does a lot of heavy lifting. And in voice acting, that is simply not the case. And I learned very early on when I first started out. I was on an animated series as a guest star for a while. It was a Spider-Man show. And I learned, right on the spot, actually performing a character in a voice acting project, that there's a lot of nuances. It's about nuance. It's about, a line that you'd say on camera. When you do it as a voice actor, you have to add 3 or 4 layers of nuance. You have to add 3 or 4 layers of emotion and attitude on top of what you normally would do. So it is overdone or overplayed in terms of nuance and in terms of emotion, in order to convey what the attitude and the character is, because all you have is your ears. You're not seeing anyone.
Cool.
So that has to be believable. So if you have to convey, sometimes it's really subtle changes. They'll give you, on average, when you're doing a character for a video game, for example, that one line, which is just a sentence or two, you'll have to do it, 6, 7 times because they want to give you notes on each one of those reads. So each one of those reads, they'll give you, oh, can you just give me a little bit more on this word right here? Can you give me a little bit less over there? Can you give me a nuance on this right there on that phrase? Can you give me here's the attitude you want? And you've done it, 6 ways to Sunday, because each time you change those nuances and those emotional tweaks, that line says something. It means something. Coming into the line can make a difference. Coming out of the line can make a difference.
Right. Can that be something as simple as changing the emphasis on a word, or perhaps, approaching it with a different intention? It can be something as subtle as that.
Yes, it can be, and even more subtle than that. I mean, putting the emphasis on a word is easy. It's when you start to put the nuances, the emotional nuances on it, the intent of what you're saying. Is the character hesitant? Is the character deliberate? Is the character remorseful? Is the character uncertain?
Right.
Uncertainty. You have to play that uncertainty. And it's a very subtle nuance. And if that has to be in there. And you're also recording, and many times you're recording your lines singularly. There's nobody else in the room. It's just you.
It's not a back and forth, right?
No, it's not a back and forth. No, they'll lead you in. Sometimes they'll lead you in and they'll say, okay, here's the line before. And a lot of times they'll set up the attitude and here's what the situation is. And that does help tremendously, obviously, because you need to know what's going on. So they'll set it up for you, but there's no one else there. So you have to have these several different types of takes and these nuances so that they can work them in with everybody else in their line deliveries, on in those scenes. So it's very, very, it is very tricky work.
Yeah, and especially to have consistency of direction across those different conversations, because that director that's maybe got you to do those 6 or 7 different takes, they've got to have versions for the other actor in response so they can match it.
That's correct. And plus the fact they'll take one line from this speech and another line from that speech and a third line from this other speech, and each version, and to make the one speech that they want, because they have the option of doing that. That's why you're doing multiple takes. Is that editorially they'll say, well, I like that last line he did on that speech. Let's use that last line. And I like the first line on this speech, and I like the middle line on that speech.
And it can be sort of almost Frankensteined together.
That's exactly, they'll do it. They'll exactly do that. If they so desire, they have the option of doing that. So, I'm not sure, having after done the work, which pieces they're going to do and which ones they're not. They prefer, of course, to have it all in one line so that it's very smooth and connected. But sometimes if there's a pause or a period, they can just swap out those lines. It doesn't matter, and they have the option to do so. So it is far more difficult type of work than it is in terms of being on camera acting. It's much more complex than.
Yeah, from the sounds of it, you also have a reduced palette to be able to then convey those emotions. You haven't got expression, body language. It has to all come from that vocal source. So and again, Tim, you've been wonderful with my segues here. This is really helping the flow right now. So in terms of a character, taking someone like a character you played like Tuvok on Voyager, you played that character in multiple video games as well, a couple of Elite Force titles, I believe Star Trek Online as well. And that, to me, based on everything you've just said, what was that shift for you? Because you had that 7 years of being able to fully realize and physicalize the character. Did you find anything particularly tricky translating Tuvok to a voiceover role?
As a matter of fact, no, that was actually the easiest role I had.
Right.
Because there are not as many nuances with the Vulcans. Their emotions are masked. So fortunately for me, I didn't have to worry so much about the nuances. And plus, most of those in the game, he's in a command position. So he's busy doling out instructions and information and things like that.
Tim, you've been telling me what to do for years.
So he doesn't have to worry so much about that. His playing that character on camera or as a voiceover character, that character in voiceover on camera is much easier than trying to do a character that is human in either one of those venues, because as an actor, you train to show emotions, and that character is one that doesn't typically show them. So everything is very subtle. It's more subtle, but I don't have to worry as much about the nuances. Yes, there are some, but I played that character, so I don't have to go try to figure out who he is and what it is, as opposed to doing a couple different characters on a fantasy video game, in which I have to remember what that other character was and what they were doing and what their attitude was and their vocal quality was, and get that consistent all the way through. Plus be able to show all of the just entire ranges of emotions for each one of those characters. That is far more difficult than reviving, the character that I played for 7 years. That's much easier. Those sessions went by like a breeze for me. So
brilliant. I suppose also because you have that context to bring in, you've got that history, which
I've already done it, and it's not going to sound much different than the way that I would have performed it as an actor, because it's Tuvok's character. That's
sure.
He just is not about showing a lot of emotion and range. I mean, if he's irritated, it's ever so subtle. You're not even going to barely know it. So that was piece of cake. That was cake and ice cream for me compared to the other stuff.
Sure, yeah. Because actually, that's something as well I wanted to ask you about, which was then obviously you've done a whole bunch of video game voice acting across your career. Often at times when I look at it, I mean, your work ethic is just bonkers, compared, when you're doing stuff between TV, film, you're directing, you've got a band, it's a real pantheon of work that you're putting out there. And one particular credit of yours caught my eye, because I'm a huge fan of Naughty Dog and The Last of Us. It's one of my absolute favorite all-time series. And I genuinely don't know the answer to this question, so I'm hoping you can enlighten me on this. You are credited in The Last of Us Part 2 as providing additional voices. What does that mean?
On which project?
On The Last of Us Part 2.
The Last of Us Part 2. Additional voices are only going to be those bits and pieces of other people's, just the characters that only have one line or two lines. Right. They just come into a scene and it's got, he went that way. It's that kind of stuff. That's what those are. Additional voices are just, small bit parts. That normally when you do voice acting for, if you're doing animation, there are people who do animation, they do several characters, 3 or 4 or 5 characters that are different from each other, because they don't want to pay another 5 actors. They can just get the same actor to do the same thing.
Get him to do the whole lot. So.
Yeah, just do the lot. And when you're doing video games, you have a bunch of people coming and going, nurse, doctor, cop, bad guy, thug, whatever, soldier. So while you're in the booth, they'll just have you read 2 or 3 other parts, as bits and pieces, and that's what those are, as additional voices.
Because I had no idea that there was so much multi-role involved in that process.
Because all those parts in there are not individual people. They're sometimes the same actors doing just different lines. You just have to make sure that your voice is discernible for that specific character and doesn't sound like the character you just got through doing.
So the challenge there becomes differentiation, right? Like
to give this character, whoever it is, a handle of their own. So if it's a doctor or a soldier, somebody just walks in the room and says such and such, a thug, one of the bad guys, the henchman or something, you got to have a different voice for that character, and it got to be consistent if they come back later,
and say, we needed 1 or 2 more lines from this guy.
Yeah, later on, like an hour later, they'll say, okay, we got a couple more, whatever. And so typically, and what happens in some of these, especially the video games, I'll record those in, several sessions over a period of 1.5 years. They take 2 years to develop those games, maybe sometimes longer, and you'll come back 3 months later, 6 months later, they want you back to do some more work on blah, blah, blah.
And you've got to suddenly, you've got to clue in to those choices you were making,
I go in and they have to play back what I did 6 months ago.
Wow.
And I have to remember what that was. I said, okay, that's what I did. and then
Right.
you'll get into the pocket and record the voice and keep going.
So that's
And
that's the art of it, right? Like that's the work,
yeah,
the grunt work.
that's the work. Yeah, that's the heavy lifting, and you have to be consistent all the way through your session. You might get tired, your voice might get tired, you might start to slip a little bit from the type of quality the voice of the character has. I've had some where they were a little bit raspier here and there, and if you lose the raspy, they're going to remind you, oh yeah, you got to play that, you got to take that again, because you're losing some of the quality of that voice, because you've been doing it, and all of a sudden you start, you get tired, or you get distracted, or you get weary of doing it, and all of a sudden it'll fluctuate. And so you've got to be consistent from line to line, and that includes when the character's emotional level goes up or down. You still have to be consistent with the quality, the tone, and the timbre of the voice for that character. So if the character is excitable or excited, something's going on and they're rushing around or doing something, it's different than when they're seated and just talking, in a sort of a normal conversation or meditatively. And of course, along with that goes all of the, in many cases, all the fighting sounds you have to make. You have to record all the fighting grunts and groans and hits and sword swings and all that, and attacks and jumps, and all that has to be recorded as well.
I think you've made a really interesting, I think your perspective on this is really interesting, because I think there's a misconception about voice acting that because you aren't considering, blocking and camera placement, that suddenly it becomes a not easier, but a simpler proposition than, say, on camera work. But actually what you've spoken to there dispels that myth, I think, and shows quite clearly that it's still retaining all of those things that you have to bring to a film set or a TV show.
Yes.
And if anything, has a longer turnaround, because like you say, you're being brought back, months after you initially recorded.
That's correct. That's correct. The fantasy pieces, especially, I've done one just recently. I did one, and that's like the second or third session I've gone in on for that one project. And they average at least 2 to 3 sessions. They average that. If your character is a major character in the piece and is all the way throughout the story, because they do rewrites, they do changes and rewrites and all kinds of things, and also additional packets, additional pieces that they'll add on later to the game, the extension pieces and all that stuff. You got to do all that as well. So
start throwing DLC into the mix, and then it's a whole different thing. I alluded to this a bit earlier, which is that, I've followed your career for a long time, and I look at your resume, I look at the work you've pumped out, and to me, like, if I could have half the stamina that you're exuding just from your work output, then I've had a good innings, and I'm having I've done well. So I'm wondering if you could speak to that a little bit. Your philosophy to it is, because you just don't seem to stop, and it's genuinely, I'm fascinated by that and what that philosophy is behind that.
Well, fortunately for me, and here's the deal. I did do some other projects while I was working on Voyager. I was involved in a couple of other things on the side. I was directing some pieces here and there. I was doing some voiceover work on Voyager. I was doing a couple of things. And I was also playing music, I think, while I was on the show as well. The thing about it is that, during the shooting time, that I didn't have a lot of free time that much on the side.
Sure.
It was during the hiatus that I was able to do a lot of other things. I had a couple of 3 months open, and I would, I might get involved in something in that break. Once the show is over, then I have a lot more free time. And so the things that I'm doing now, for example, music, I've been playing music for 45 years. So it's been off and on. It's always been up and down. I dedicate only a percentage of time to the music. I dedicate only a percentage of time to voiceover, a percentage of time to acting, and a percentage of time directing. Directing jobs are not constant. They only come in every once in a while. And those projects are not, those projects are done by either referral or by from the ground up, when you're working with somebody to put the project together and they get it funded, et cetera, et cetera. Occasionally somebody will reach out to me and ask me if I was interested in shooting a project of theirs. For that kind of thing, the only thing that I'm concerned with generally is the script and the prep time for the actual production. And a lot of times that never goes beyond the script. The project just doesn't happen. When it does happen, it happens fairly quickly. I have to block out a certain amount of time, and I don't have time for anything else while I do that. And then once that's done, I'm in post-production on it, and I just wait for the editing and the cutting and the post-production work to be done, and I just look at it when it comes in, and I can go do something else. So to set up a gig here and there, the gigs are only 1 or 2 times a month, maybe, that I perform. I don't rehearse with the band all the time because they're basically, they're all pros, and I can rehearse on the day, or I can send them the material, they can get it together, and it's not that complicated, so it doesn't take up much time. So I can go do a performance. I can, and organizing is not that difficult. I do everything myself. It's not that hard. It's easy. The voiceover work comes in when it does. I look at the dates on the calendar, said, yeah, I can do this date, that date, and I go do it. It's only a day. I mean, you're doing voiceover work. It's usually just a session, 4 hours or whatever, and you're done. So, and the acting work, I just finished these 3 projects, they're just, a couple days here and there, 4 days here and there. It's not a full-time thing. If I was working on a series full-time and I was one of the major actors on there, during that time that I'm on there, probably not going to have time for much else.
Sure.
But between these gigs, since I'm not on anything permanently, then all of those things that I'm able to do are simply a matter of looking at the calendar and saying, yeah, I can do it here, or no, I can't do it there. And that's it. And I do have time to work on all of those things. I've got 4 projects right now that at least 3 or 4 that I'm working on with other people, other producers. And these are feature film projects that are from the ground up. One is a series and the other 2 or 3 are features, and that's working on it from the ground up in terms of development, the story, script, the contacts, the meetings, all that kind of stuff. And those things, I just checkerboard them and just put them in a compartment. So today may be this project, and next week it may be that project, and tomorrow it may be this project, and I just have to shift gears as to which project is what, and where I am in the path of each one of them, because each one of them is at a different stage. So, and if one of those projects actually heats up and takes off, well, then I shift all my focus to that project, and
that becomes the priority.
That becomes a priority, and everything else goes on the back burner. But given the fact that I'm not on a show consistently, I'm not obligated to work on something every single day or every other day solidly. I have time to actually indulge in all of these different things, which I really do enjoy.
Yeah.
That's the difference. Either it's one show that I'm, completely swamped on, or it's a whole bunch of things I get to do that I enjoy doing, that I have time to do. And that's the way it is right now. In between
You are basically a time management ninja. Like but that does require a real discipline to be able to,
Yeah, I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's a lot. It is some scheduling and strategizing and figuring out whether you can do something for time, whether or not you can do something. And a lot of it, for me, a lot of it comes down to the people that I'm working with, because if I'm working as an actor, my obligation to the project is dialogue and showing up and saying my lines and hitting my marks. If it's directing, it's directing. I'm not involved in the distribution. I'm not involved in the financing. I'm not involved in the producing. I'm only involved in shooting. So if the project is not off the ground and it's only meetings and development and scripts, and I got to read a script here and there, I can read it whenever I want. I can read it at 4 a.m. It doesn't require that much time that I have to worry about. It's only if it takes off. When it takes off, if I have to get pre-production going and casting going and then shoot up, that's exhausting.
Yeah.
And then I'm really focused on just that. And there's no time for anything else. And there isn't any time for anything else. So if it's an acting role, I'm just learning my dialogue, learning my lines, showing up on set to go ahead and roll. I can do other things in between there, but basically when those things are happening, they're happening and I just do them. And I'm just allocating the time based on what they give me. You know, a lot of times it's like, you know, it's back and forth. The dates keep changing. Schedule keeps changing. You know, and I'm telling them, it's a possibility I may not be available at that time, whereas I'm available now, you know, or next week. But a month from now, 2 months from now, that can change. So I can't guarantee you I'll be available, and because something else could come up. And so the hardest thing about it, typically, if you're involved in multiple projects at the same time, it's just the scheduling. It's just trying to work out the scheduling. It's back and forth between, you know, sometimes my agent has to do it for me, and the manager or agent has to go on, and they have to work with production to say, okay, well, he's got this and that, and he's shooting this and that, and when do you have him? When do you have him on the board? You know, can you? Is it all right if he's got these days available, but doesn't have these days available? Can we?
I don't even want to imagine what that looks like.
Oh yeah. I don't generally get involved in all of that. That's the managers and agents. But you know, if it's my own project, I'll say the same thing.
Right.
You know, I'll be the one in charge of saying, okay, I can't do this right here, but I can do it there. And I shot 2 projects back to back in December of 2020. Literally, I went from 6 days on one project, and the very 7th day I was starting the next project, and I was directing them.
Rolled straight in.
Straight in. There was no breaks. There was mere hours between the two.
See, and that's what I'm talking about, Tim. That's what your work ethic is. If I did that, if I had to do, you know, I'm a drama teacher by trade. That's my day job. When I've done my 5 days, I go, cool, it's the weekend. I'm not going to be productive at all. So the fact that you're rolling from one, not just going from that acting project into another acting project, you're switching discipline as well.
It's you know, in terms of shooting those things, I had to prep both of them prior to when we were shooting. So I was prepping both projects side by side, and I had a competent producer on at least 1 or 2 of them. I had the second one more so than the first one, but mostly the first one I had a longer run up to. The second one is a shorter run up, but the producer is very competent, and he's got all the dots, I's crossed, and the I's dotted, T's crossed. So I could rely on him to carry some of the lifting, and all I had to do was check in with him, verify some things here and there, the casting process, and he sent me the video of the locations. I didn't have to go all the way out there. I did go out there for at least one to scout the sets. And I did that. I just found time to do it prior to shooting, so that once all the scouting was done and all the prep was done for both projects, I started on the first one, bang, 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 bang. And that was not complicated because I only had one location. And then second one, multiple locations, but I had already prepped it, and I just rolled right into that. And at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, when I'm, after working all day and I'm trying to get some sleep, I did have to answer some questions about, the next one that was coming up.
Right.
Because they did arise. They had to, I think they had to recast one role at the last minute or some shit. I don't know. It was just,
man.
So, I had to look at, they sent me the stuff to look at, the roles the people were reading for. And so I had to go through the casting there for that. We did, a couple of hitches, but they were small. And I was able to make that role straight in because that was the only window of time we had to do it. Otherwise it would overlap and I couldn't do both.
So I'm so glad you've spoken to your process, because I think genuinely, people will be fascinated to hear that. So thank you. I've actually only I'm on my last sort of question now to kind of wrap up our time together. And it does sort of full circle it a little bit. When I look at your career across all your different disciplines that you've explored, I know I would find this difficult if I had a resume like that, but I'm gonna ask it. I'm gonna give it a shot.
Yeah.
Dream role that you haven't played yet. A dream role that you haven't played.
Oh, a dream role that I haven't played. A dream role for me would be a period piece.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, that's something that I really would look forward to doing.
Interesting. As an actor.
Yeah, as an actor, yes. As an actor, for certain, a period piece. And it can go back from, as early as the Victorian age, as far
Okay.
back as antiquity, the medieval times, or something
Interesting.
like that. I would enjoy playing a role like that, a decent role in a
Yeah.
setting, a character type like that. Absolutely, because how many times would I have an opportunity to play those kinds of
Oh,
parts?
absolutely. And the challenge of the language as well, like the dialogue.
Language, everything, the mannerisms, the language, the attitudes, the costumes, everything coming together, to make those things a reality would really be cool. That's kind of the stuff that I would look forward to being able to work in, and I have not had hardly any opportunities like that to
Hmm.
play anything that was in that time frame. I've had some different roles, some very different roles, unusual parts I've had here and there, but nothing like that where I could really go out. I've directed this stuff and I enjoy shooting
Hmm.
it in the time period that I've shot. I've shot a bunch of stuff. I've got everything from the future to the past. I've got all that covered, but I haven't played an acting role. Like I said, something that's from the Middle Ages, or
Hmm.
even older, and even Victorian, late 1800s, early. I did get a chance to play in a Western, which was a
Oh,
great
come on. Now
kick.
that's
Yeah,
that's a rite of passage right
that's
there.
a rite of passage. Yeah,
I mean,
we
are
called.
we talking? Are we talking the full situation?
I was. It was a cool character.
Right.
He was a preacher, but he carried a gun. His pistol was
Oh
in his Bible.
yes.
So he had a pistol and a Bible. It was a cool. I was riding horses, man. I was shooting zombies or whatever the hell it was.
Oh come on. You've basically
Yeah,
just
yeah.
done a checklist now.
As long as I did. When he called me, I said, "Yeah." So I want you to play the when and where. Um, I'll be there. And there's not an actor in this town that's not going to want to play in a Western. It's just not going
In
to
a
happen.
zombie
So
western. I
zombie, it was a zombie freaking Western, man. What a kick in the pants.
I need to
Um,
immediately find this.
yeah, good luck. I don't know where it's at right now. It was called Six Gun Saviors. I don't know if I don't know if he has distribution on it or not, but it's called Six Gun Savior. Frank Zanka. I didn't, I'm not responsible for the writing on it. I'm just in it playing a character, and it's not a huge role. I'm part of a posse that comes riding in to take care of some business against the zombies at some point. But there's a lot of characters in and out of this whole
That's
piece, and
awesome.
I'm just one of a group of many. And but I've got a couple of scenes there and a couple of
Dude,
shots and a couple of things.
I can assure you on the bingo card of things I thought you would talk about, this is not this was not on there. That
Well,
is
it was
fantastic.
it was the it was really
What a wild ride.
it was really fun. It was really fun to do it, and
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. It was just, yeah. I mean, something. I mean, that's the only thing I can consider that, kind of that I can consider that's period, because 1800s,
Sure, yeah.
that I could consider that's period, that I was able to do, as a role. But anything beyond that, yeah, sure. Those are the types of things that I
Wicked.
really would like to get a chance to, and that is about as rare as it's going to be.
Yeah. That's that's a great pick though. I love it.
Yeah,
So okay, so final question, and this is something that we're actually asking every single guest we have on the podcast. This is how we wrap up
yeah,
our conversations with people.
yeah.
I'm fascinated by legacy, by the idea of defining our own legacy versus perhaps people's perception of us. And I was curious from your perspective, what do you want your legacy as Tim Russ? What do you want your legacy to be? What do you want to be known for that defines you?
Well, it would be nice if it was being remembered for the body of work that I've done over the years. And that includes voiceover and acting and directing. If I could, that would be something that I would look forward to seeing, because I know that it's going to more than likely be primarily Star Trek. Um, if something happened to me, God forbid, physically, if I passed away or whatever, that's what they're going to, if they reported at all, it would be because of the franchise. The franchise has such a big footprint, in our world, and in popular culture that they would probably mention Trek as opposed to anything else, because unless I'm on another show that becomes iconic, and that is a long running show, a series, or a series of feature films in which I'm playing a lead character, and those films are absolutely ginormous, then you're going to get the recognition from that. But likely, if it was a news report or something like that, it would be from they would use the reference of the Star Trek, not anything else, because the other stuff is just it's in passing, and these gigs are coming and going, and they're not that solid. So the thing that people would immediately recognize on a larger scale would be the Trek stuff. So I know that's what the legacy is going to be, but I would prefer it to be something where all the other work that you've done.
I really like that it's to consider the body of work, just the sheer
body
amount
of work
of creativity that you've put out into the world. I think that's an awesome message.
And it's a lot of work. Yeah, it's a lot of years. I mean, it's the culmination of a lot of years of work. Who was it? Fay Ray was talking about it. The actress from the original King Kong. She said that, here I'd done all this work prior to that movie and since that movie, as an actress, but who was the star? Who did everybody remember? They remembered King Kong,
Right.
A giant ape gets the spotlight from that point to forward, and hardly anybody's going to remember her as the actress who was, had a major career during that time. It's just crazy, man.
100%.
And it's which is the the irony of this business. It's there's so many paradoxes and ironies that come with this kind of work. That you, for just as an example, in my career, I mean, I did Voyager for 7 years, 26 shows a season. It's still in reruns. But the one thing that most people remember me for are 4 words that I spoke in the movie Spaceballs. That's it. 4 words. And that's what most people will remember me for. If they know that I was the one that did it, they remember that.
Yeah.
They may not have seen Voyager ever before, but they'll remember those 4 words in that movie. That's the irony of this kind of work,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sort of this bizarre thing that happens where it's that sort of perception you may put out versus the perception of you. It's a very strange dichotomy.
Yes, it is very strange. It is. Yeah. It is magic. It's a form of alchemy. It's unexplainable sometimes. Just the fact that you are perceived, as that character on Voyager, in particular, by a lot of people, and not much else. I mean, they don't really, some folks, the fans will react to stuff they may have seen me on an NCIS or something. They don't care about that. They care about Voyager. They would bend over backwards to see me in something Trek related, and that's what it is, man. You're part of that franchise, that lore, that whole thing, and it is indelible. It is not coming out. It is not going to end. It's not going to stop. It's going to be that way forever. So, you adapt to it, and you roll with it, and you accept it as it is.
Well, I couldn't think of a better way to wrap this up. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to our first episode of our brand new season of Some Drivel. Although I feel like the name of our podcast has done this conversation a disservice, because that was fascinating. Tim, thank you so much for giving up your time. It's been genuinely insightful to get your perspective on the industry, your process, and just hearing you speak to all of these things. I think it's genuinely going to be great for people to listen to. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.